Oh, I can't believe we haven't seen you in
Can I have
forever.
everybody's attention, please?
You've been
We're going to
fishing,
start
though.
the meeting.
That's good.
Before I introduce our guest speaker tonight, I just have 3 announcements for the club. The first one will be the Class in the Grass this Saturday
Working on it.
from 10 to 2 p.m. at Salisbury Community Park. That's the casting clinic that Michael Helms runs. Next is there's a Tie for a Cause on Saturday, July the 19th in Lenore at the Patterson School. This time, all the proceeds of those be donated to the Project Killing Blood's program. Also, Psycho Fly Fishing Smalley Show Thursday, August the 21st to the 24th at Zulu Outpost. That's in Jefferson in Ashe County. We're going to get more information about it, and we'll post it this month on the club Facebook. Tonight's presenter is Callie Freeman. Callie has her doctorate degree from NC State Entomology. She's also a board member of Casting Carolinas, and she's the owner of Callie Freeman Fly Fishing. Tonight's topic will be a presentation on aquatic and terrestrial creatures, what fly patterns imitate them, and how to effectively fish them.
All right, thank you. Yeah, this is bugs. This is really bugs for beginners. Okay, so this is learning how to match the hatch. But before we get started, thank you all for having me back. It's great to be here. I've been out today. I told some of the people earlier, did a little bit of my first attempt at carp fishing. And so, has anybody done that before? Okay. I went out with Paul Rose and we went just about an hour from here, like 7:30 to 3. It was hot. So, but that was tough stuff. It was a lot like redfish. So did you all have fun when you went? Were you successful when you went carp fishing? Oh, okay, nice. Yeah. This was a lot like redfish, except they're less forgiving. So you all have a lot of that right here. I had a friend recently who was like, well, waters are getting warm, trout fishing's almost over, but you know what? Like there's a whole lot of other stuff to fish for. So carp are in your backyard. You've got Paul Rose who can take you out like on his Hell's Bay, get you prepped for saltwater fly fishing. It was a lot of fun. But man, those things, they're picky and tough, but it was a good time. So bear with me, I've got my Powerade, all right, ready to go. I did want to mention Casting Carolinas. So I joined the board in January. So I'm a little new to the organization, but I've had the chance to do 2 retreats. And I know you all are huge supporters of ours. And I just want to say thank you. You know, you all are consistent. You're always there, always spreading the news about our mission. And we just really want to thank you all for doing that. For me, it's been pretty amazing. It's definitely the best thing I've ever done. I love it. The women are transformed. When they come in, a lot of times they've just finished up treatment or they might still be going through treatment. And this is the first thing that, their lives have been completely out of their control for so long. And oftentimes this is the first thing that they're doing to take control back of their lives. And it's not, we fly fish, we talk about bugs, we learn how to cast and all that, but the big part of this is these women, and the 2 retreats I've attended, in the beginning, Star asks them, our executive director, at any point in time during your treatment, did any doctor or nurse tell you that what you're going through could lead to post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms? And in those 2 retreats, only one person had her nurse care person tell her yes. And so the retreats, we kind of get them in with fly fishing, hey, come try something fun and new, but it's really a way to learn trauma therapy through STAR's flow program. So we've got some participants here with us tonight, and they can probably tell you all about it, but just I really want to thank you all for being supportive. Right now we have 3 retreats per year. We have 16 spots for participants, and we have a wait list of like 34 women per retreat. So we really want to kind of ramp that up with our fundraising and our volunteers so that we can offer more retreats to help all of our mothers, sisters, daughters within the Carolinas. Okay. So with that, I want to encourage you all to come and fish in the Taiwan On tournament in Cherokee in October. This is our major fundraiser that we have every year. The money goes to sponsor these women and these retreats. There's a lot of different ways you can get involved. One of the big pushes that we're going to do this year, this is our 10th anniversary of Casting Carolinas, and it's our 10th Taiwan On tournament. So we've got room for 20 teams in the Open and the Pro Division. And so we'd really like to fill those up. And this year we're planning on having a big captain's meeting on Friday night to celebrate. It's right before Halloween, so maybe we'll throw in some fun, costumes for the teams. But you grab your buddy, come up with a fun team name, and come up and fish, and it's for a great cause. So we'd love to have you all up there as a team, and if you'd like to sponsor the tournament, we'd love to have that as well. Yes?
What river is it that they fish?
For the pros, the first day they fish the Ravens Fork, and the second day the Trophy Waters. And so in the Open Division, which would probably be most of us, there's amateur teams, there's a Pro Mini. So if you've ever been paid to teach fly fishing, you can get a person who's an amateur. You can fish in the Pro Mini. That's on the Trophy Water, or 2 amateurs. So this is the Open Division, or the alumni. So the alumni can fish together, and they get a guide. So 1 day for the Open Division and 2 days for the pros. Okay, and there's all kinds of cash prizes in the pros, and then lots of cool prize packs in the Open Division. But we'd love to have you all. We'd love to have, if any of you all would like to sponsor, you can sponsor an alumni team. You can become a sponsor of the tournament. We've got several different giving levels. For a participant to come to a retreat, it costs about $1,000, but it's all free to them. So this helps raise that money so these ladies can come and experience this for free. So any other questions about Casting Carolinas? All right. I know that's not why we're here, but thank you for indulging me with that. We would love, love, love to see you all there, because I really want to celebrate the people that have been there to help us over the past 10 years. Okay, so let's talk about bugs. So I have a doctorate degree in entomology. We discussed this the last time I was here, right? But it's not in aquatic entomology. Haha, I got you. So like a lot of you all, I don't know how much of my story I need to go back and retell. I'll do that real quickly. I started fishing in the late 1900s. We discussed that the last time I was here. That's what my kids said the other day. Yeah, that happened in the late 1900s. And I was like, wait, what? wait. I was like in high school then. What are you talking about? Yeah, exactly. End of the last century.
Tell them you were around long before Google.
Right, yes, I was. Oh my gosh. Then I'm going to have like flashbacks of like trying to dial up. Oh my gosh, it was awful.
And told to get off the phone because your parents.
Yes, trying to like, have the cord through the door and all that, and your dad picking up the phone while you're talking to some boy. Anyway, so late 1900s, my dad and I watched A River Runs Through It, and we're hooked right away. And then we also spent our weekends watching Flip Palette and Spanish Fly with Jose Wahebe. I loved watching him. So my dad was like, all right, took 3 generations of us to Boone. We did the 10 to 2 method. And then we went back to Kentucky and we smallmouth fished on all the streams around there. But you didn't really need to know too much about the bugs for smallmouth, right? They're not too picky. Fast forward like 20 years, and I'm getting back into fishing after all that school, and we moved out to Oregon. I married a Marine, and they have a huge base out there. Well, actually, it's not a huge base, but in Portland, Oregon. And while I was there, I wanted to learn as much as I could about fishing for trout. And so, of course, bugs are a big part of that. And when I was in grad school, I was in the ag department. And so when we were learning entomology, if it didn't eat your crop or eat you or your cattle, they did not care about aquatic insects, all right? So the environmental side of entomology is still a little bit more of a newer thing, right? So I'm out in Oregon. I have this opportunity to fish all these streams and learn as much as I can about trout. And every time I would get to the river, I would be really anxious. I'd go to the fly shop, I'd get some flies, I'd go to the river and I would open up the fly box and I would just kind of pick out something that looked pretty or it had some sort of cool name, and I would tie that on, and then I'd walk to the bank and I'd hop right in, and then I'd wade out as far as I possibly could, and then I would just start, casting out to the middle of the river, and I thought, this is it. I am Brad Pitt now, right? I'm out there. And everything about that is wrong, right? A lot of you all realize that. So I wouldn't get any fish, and then I would get refusals, right? They'd come up and look at it and like, nah, and do a little tail slap and move on. Other people would be catching stuff, and it was again, so frustrating. And then I would go into the fly shops and I would look at the bins, and as an entomologist, I was kind of like, what? Like, I don't know what these things are, and they're named by some guy I've never heard of, or they're named the material that they're tied with. Like, none of that just says exactly what it is. Luckily, these are, say, caddis, but not always. So I had to kind of put on my entomology brain to figure this out. And so that's what we're going to go through today. And I'm going to give you all just what I call the keys to success. So there's something like 75,000 aquatic insects. You don't need to know the genus and species names of them. I don't at all, okay? But what we're going to go through is how to look for insect activity. So when you get to the river, before you hop in, let's look for bugs, all right? Once you find that bug, we're going to go through the life stages, okay? Is this a larva? Is this a pupa? Is this an adult? And then I'm going to give you some characteristics, just basic characteristics, so you can tell, is this a mayfly? Is this a caddis? And so forth. And then you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to open up my fly box and I'm going to match that to what's in my fly box. It's that simple, okay? All right, who's ready to go back to school? Yeah, all right, I got one. Anybody else? Woo, all right, a couple. All right, so what makes an insect an insect? Okay, they've got 3 main body regions: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen, okay? The head is where we have our eyes, antenna, and mouth parts. The thorax is our center of locomotion, so that's where we have our wings and our legs, and then we have our abdomen, which houses our butts and guts, all right? So that's what makes an insect an insect. All right, what's not an insect? Okay, I put these up here because these are not insects, but you will find their imitations in the fly shops. All right, the first one are the crustaceans. So in Kentucky, we call these crawdads, right? Got some crayfish up there. Let's see, what else we've got some scuds. Have you all ever fished scuds before? Yeah, so the first time I was learning to kind of catch big trout was in Craig, Missouri with a gal named Whitney Gould. And we were on the Missouri River in Craig, Montana. And just below the river, just below the dam, you can fish those scuds, tiny little scuds, and catch these huge trout. I mean, it took like 3 or 4 of me breaking those things off before I finally realized how much pressure to put on those. So those are really cool and very important. I put these little isopods or roly-polies on here just because I think they're neat, but little aquatic roly-polies. And then, of course, we have the San Juan worms, which are really important. And I love fishing woolly buggers, right? Stripping a woolly bugger through a stream, especially those big stock trout, just lots of fun. So those are not insects, but still important. All right, let's go through the life cycles. There's 2 main types of life cycles. There's complete metamorphosis and incomplete metamorphosis. In complete metamorphosis, the insect is going to go through a complete change in a resting stage called the pupa, okay? So the adult insect, the female will lay an egg. That egg will hatch into a larva, And that larva will eat and grow and eat and grow and eat and grow until it gets too big for its skin suit. And I think the last time I was here, some of you all had seen Tommy Boy, the movie, right? Where the insect gets too big. Tommy Boy's a big guy and he's singing, he's got his friend's jacket on, who's a real small guy, and he's singing Fat Guy in a Little Coat. And then he goes like this and he rips his coat. Well, that's what happens to these bugs. They get too big for their skin suit, and their skin suit rips along the back, and then the next stage of insect or the next size larva comes out. So they eat, grow, molt, and then they go into a pupal stage, they liquefy and rearrange, and they're in there resting for a while, and then the adult comes out, okay? The second type of metamorphosis is incomplete metamorphosis. So in this one, the egg hatches into what we call a nymph. And so it looks like a tiny version of the adult insect. So it will eat, grow, and then it gets too big for its little skin suit. It'll split along the back again, and then the next size nymph comes out, and then the next size. So what's important here is that you can see each time this one molts and gets bigger, they start to develop wing pads. They get bigger each time. And so sometimes you see those on the insects, or when you're tying flies, you'll put those wing pads in there. All right, you guys ready to meet the insects? Enthusiasm, woo! All right, the crowd goes wild. All right. Okay, so we're going to start with the mayflies. They have one of the more complicated life cycles. They are in the order Ephemeroptera. That's from ephemera. They were named by Aristotle, which means to live but for a day. And that's because the adults only live for sometimes a couple hours to a few days, okay, as adults. But they have a much longer life cycle, usually 1 to 2 years. So let's start with the female, all right? You see a female, she's mated. You see one of these mayflies going up and down the river. They lay eggs. They're very graceful. So they'll go up and down and up and down. And each time she goes down to the river, she lays a little packet of eggs. It's almost like toothpaste being squeezed out of her abdomen, okay? That egg packet is going to disperse and go down, and that egg is going to hatch into a nymph. And that nymph will eat, grow, molt, eat, grow, molt, eat, grow, molt. And then at some point, it's like, okay, I'm ready to become an adult. It's going to swim to the surface, and it's really hard to get through that film layer, that surface layer, right? They have to break through that. And when they do, that skin suit is going to split again, and that's the emerger stage, and the dun pops out, all right? The dun is the real pretty one that has its wings up, and they just float along down the river long enough for their wings to dry. They're going to fly off again up here, and they're going to rest for just a minute and molt one more time into the reproductive adult. Then the males are going to go out over the river. They're going to form a huge cloud. The males have these really big eyes and really long arms so that when a female comes in, they can grab them and then mate with them. And so they'll mate. The female goes and she does her graceful up and down laying eggs until she's completely spent, and she'll fall down to the water with her wings outstretched, and that's the end of her life. When I have women in the audience, we're always like, oh, it's very sad, right? And the men are like, All right. Okay, so let's talk about identification. So mayfly nymphs in general are very tapered, as you can see, from their head to the very tip of their abdomen. So they're kind of torpedo shaped. The antennae aren't really that big, so that's not something that we would use as a identification characteristic. But they have their gills along their abdomen, and they always have 2 to 3 tails depending on what kind. And there's different types for how they live their life. So this one is a clinger. They're very dorso-ventrally flattened, so back to stomach flat, and so they're in really fast water, clinging onto the rocks for dear life. They're so flat that you can see their eyes are actually on top of their heads. All right, those are clingers in very fast water. We've got crawlers here. I always joke that they remind me of my husband. You know, he's the big Marine. He's got these big chest and big arms. These guys are crawling around the river bottom. And then we have swimmers up here, very graceful. They're much more active within the water column and therefore more available for trout. And then we have the burrowers. These are really cool guys. They have these fossorial forelegs that are great for digging holes in these U-shaped tunnels down in the soil surface. And they'll make these U-shaped tunnels, and then they'll pump water through the U-shaped tunnel, and so they can actively bring water across their gills. And so a lot of times they can live in water that doesn't have as much oxygen. Okay. Those are, I didn't mention that, but we were talking about this today. Apparently there's some pretty good hex hatches, hexagenia hatches. Have any of you all fished those before? So these, man, there's supposedly on the lakes here, there's some pretty big hex hatches. So these are the really big mayflies. And when they come out, they're in such numbers that you can see them on radar. Yeah, and so there's a couple lakes in the Pacific Northwest that I've fished, and you get there kind of at dusk and you go out onto the water, and all of a sudden it looks like the lake is boiling. And you never know how long that hatch from day to day is going to last, but it's a lot of fun to fish. So we should all probably start paying attention to where that's happening, even for the other fish, even the warm water fish. That might be a lot of fun to target around here. So to find out more about that one. Okay, so here is a picture of the dun. So again, this is the one that comes out from the emerger, and they just drift along until their wings dry. So their wings are sailboat-like, so they're upright, and they are opaque. You can't see through them. That's kind of the big difference between the dun and the reproductive adult. Right? So this is a hexagenia. This is my daughter at Kentucky Lake, which is a very shallow lake. So that just goes to show you that these can live in conditions that aren't the greatest as far as oxygen goes. The spinner. So here's the adults. This is the female here. You can see her wings are translucent, and she has an egg packet right here. Here's the male. Look, he's like, I've only got eyes for you. Look how big those eyes are, right? He's got to compete with all those other males to try to find a mate in those big clouds. And then look how long his arms are, so he can just grab one once he finds one. But again, we've got translucent wings. You can see the tails on the tip of the abdomen. And then here's a spinner. So you've probably seen these in the fly shop. Okay, so their wings are outstretched to the side. Okay, so let's talk about how we match to what's in our fly box or what we see in the fly shop. So one of the first things I like to mention to new anglers, anytime I see bead or wire on a fly, that tells me that that's going to go where? Down, right? It's going to go down. It's going to go, you're going to be nymphing that, okay? And then how heavy the bead is and how much wire is on that fly is going to determine how fast and how far that's going to sink within the water column, all right? So these are some of our mayfly nymphs. As you can see, there's no antenna coming off the front. They're torpedo shaped, and then they have these tails, okay? And again, we've got wire and beads. So all three of those are going to be somewhere a little bit different, or different sink rate. All right, here's the dun. Again, we've got, so if you look at these first two right off the bat, what are they missing? Well, they've got wings. Well, they've got a little bit of wings and legs here, but they don't have any wire on them and no bead. So these are dry flies, and they also have that tapered body, and then we have the tails, okay? And anytime you see a lot of these hackle wraps, it's going to tell you that's a dry fly, and that's used to help them float, okay? And then this guy here, I love this guy. He's an emerger, all right? He's called the film critic. I love that name, right? They hate having, trying to get through that surface film is really hard. So his name's the film critic. He has a different hook that makes him sit down a little bit differently in the water. And he also has a little bit of wire wraps as well. And then this looks like a wing case that's opening with the wings coming out, all right? Any questions on that? And we've got the tails in the back. And of course, here's our spinner. Again, no bead, no wire, tapered body, but the wings are out to the side. And then we have the tails coming off the tip of the abdomen. All right, last time I was here, we covered stoneflies pretty well, but we'll go through this one again. So these are in the order Plecoptera, which means folded wings. They have two pairs of wings that they keep nicely folded along their abdomen. We'll go through the life cycle real quick. It can be, I put a year life cycle on here, but it can be more than a year, depending on the species. So these guys, I just got back from fishing the salmon fly hatch again, and as I mentioned the last time, like in the afternoons, these females will come out flying upriver, and they're really big bugs. They look like, Chinooks coming upriver. They come down, they've got an egg packet right here. They come down to the water, and they'll shake that egg packet off, and of course that's going to attract some hungry trout. Those eggs are then going to go all the way down to the bottom of the river. Those eggs are going to hatch into little nymphs. And in the case of stoneflies, they're little shredders. So they're like little cows living on the bottom of the rocks. And they're running all over the bottom of the rocks, little vegetarians. And they're going to eat, grow, eat, grow, eat, grow, get too big for their skin suit, molt, the next size comes out. And so they're going to do that over and over and over again, 1 to 2 years. And then at some point, they're going to reach a certain water temperature, and in mass, they're all going to migrate over to the edge of the riverbank here. And then in the cover of darkness, they're going to all crawl out onto the stones and trees and grasses, and they're going to molt again. Now, have you all seen that when you've been fishing, like out west? So crazy to see thousands of those out. Really neat. Let's see here. All right, so here's a picture of, that was the salmon fly. Here's one that was a nymph, but the adult is coming out of his skin suit in the middle of the night. Here's a bunch of those shucks on a tree, which is really cool. And let's see, there's the male, I didn't mention this, but the males will climb up on some vegetation and they'll start drumming, and then if the female likes it, she'll kind of drum back, and then they meet in conjugal bliss. And then you can see the far picture there, the egg packet looks kind of like little blackberries hanging off. And I think I showed this, I know I showed this to you last time. Here's the salmon fly adult coming out, this little time lapse, but it takes a long time, and that's why they come out at night. It would just be, they tried to come out during the day, they're so vulnerable, right? This takes time for them to come out, molt, and then they've got to pump hemolymph for insect blood through their wings, and then the wings have to dry. So a very long process. So let's talk about stonefly nymph identification real quick. The big thing with these guys, to me, they look like flattened crickets, right? So they're very, again, dorsoventrally flattened. They have these really long antennae coming off their head that's forked, and then they have these really long abdominal appendages down here that are also forked. And then when you look at where their gills are, they have very rudimentary gills, and they're on their thorax and maybe the first abdominal segment. But again, very rudimentary gills. That's why these, you're only going to find them in areas with really good water quality. So they're a great indicator for that. All right, here are the adults. So again, same thing. We've got two widely forked antennae on the front and two widely forked abdominal appendages on the back. So when we're talking about matching the hatch, again, if you see a bead, that's going to tell you that's a nymph, and that belongs under the water. So here's a little black stone. He's got the two forked appendages on the back and the two forked antennae on the front. And then, of course, the little yellow stone, which is important. And we were talking about girdle bugs and Pat's rubber legs as well. Those are very good imitations. Susan's been having a lot of good luck with girdle bugs. Okay, the adult, matching the hatch. So I put the stimulator on here because that one, we use that one a lot, or something that's like that for a stonefly. There's a yellow Sally up there, and you'll notice a lot of times when we're tying these, there might be something red on the back. They call it a hot butt, and that's to stimulate or to mimic an egg sac on the back. And of course, everybody loves a chubby Chernobyl, right? All right, so when we talk about scouting for stoneflies, they are going to be, you think about where are the bugs. The adults are going to be in the grasses, in the trees, so you want to look there. You can always go and try to shake the bushes and shake the trees. If you're not seeing a lot of stoneflies, you might search along the riverbank if you think they're getting ready to come out. Okay, so that's one reason I say don't just jump right in when you get there. Fish right along the riverbank first because there might be some right there. So you don't want to ruin that. And of course, with trout, oftentimes they're along the riverbank under those trees and cut grass. They don't want to be out in the open where you've got aerial predators, and oftentimes there's slower water along the edge there as well. Okay. All right. We looked at these the last time. I've got to get some new video. Let's see. We'll watch this again. Luckily, my casting's gotten better. But so this is salmon fly fishing. All these big bugs are mating and falling into the water here. So as soon as that fly lands, those fish are like on. This is my first time doing the bow and arrow cast, but all of this is under trees and all these grasses. That's where all these bugs are mating. I mean, they're just falling out everywhere. Lots of slack. This will be my casting instructor fishing stuff. Always fish to the very end of your drift. So, yeah. I like watching these videos. This is my first year fishing. But it's always good to watch these videos because you can kind of see like, oh, I need to have my rod tip down so I can get tighter on that fish, but still managed to get that one, so that was good. I really love that kind of fishing under trees and everything. I'm actually sitting there, but if you all get a chance to go out to the Deschutes, I mean, it is gorgeous, and go over around Memorial Day weekend, okay? Best time of year to go. To the Deschutes in Oregon, yeah. The lower Deschutes is 100 miles. So yeah, we do a 3-day float, but there's all kinds of places to do it yourself, like walk in and wade all along that 100 miles, pretty much. Yeah, it's gorgeous. It's a scenic river, designated scenic. Woo. All right, pop quiz. You guys ready? All right, we're going to do this as a group, okay? So, mayfly or stonefly, and then I want you to tell me what stage you think it's in. Okay, so first, this one, mayfly or stonefly? Mayfly, and how do you know it's a mayfly? The tail's very good. The body shape, good. And you know it's a nymph because, all right, good job. How about number 2, mayfly or stonefly? Woo! Mayfly. And which one do you think it is? I heard over here somewhere. A merger. Very nice. And we know that because the curved hook, yeah. And the weight, very good. Yep, to keep it down. Got the tails. How about number 3? No. Well, stonefly, very good, very good. And we know that because, very nice. All right, how about number 4? Very good, stonefly, very nice, yep. Number 5, can you all see that? Stonefly, and you know this because? Yep. And this one's kind of humpy right here. Again, that would be kind of like the wing case. And then is this what life stage? Nymph. Very good. All right. How about this one? Yes. It can kind of be. You can kind of use that for caddis as well. And number 7? Mayfly. Dry fly. That's getting ready to die. That's called a spinner. Very good. See, don't you love group projects, right? How about number 8? Last one on this. Dry fly. Good. Dry fly. Mayfly. Nice. Do you remember which one? Very good. All right. Good job. I didn't bring any prizes today. Next time. All right, any questions so far that I might know the answer to? Yes.
On the spinners, male and female, what's the female place for eggs? Dies. At what point does the male run?
I don't know. Somebody asked me that, and I'm not really sure how many times those males can mate. So that I don't know, with both of them. I think, in either case, they can only live for a few days, but I'm going to guess they can mate multiple times, but I don't know for sure. That's a great question. Anybody else? All right. Yeah, somebody asked me when another group, and I was saying how the females, when you've got a lot of women, I give this talk to women's groups, right? And the women, when I talk about the spinner and she's done and her life is over, and all the way, 30 women will be like, oh. And I mentioned that, and one of the last groups were like, well, what about the men? And I was like, I don't know, they probably go back to the bar, have a beer and do it all over again. I don't know. All right. All right, caddis. So these guys are a little weird, right? So caddis. They're in the order Trichoptera, which means hairy wing. So their wings, and we'll show a picture a little bit later, they hold those wings roof-like over their abdomen. They extend all the way to the end of their abdomen, and they're very hairy. So Trichoptera, hairy wing. So we'll start with the female. The female will lay eggs. So she's mated, she'll lay eggs, and depending on what type of caddis, they might lay their eggs at the water surface, or there's some female caddis that can actually swim, and they'll swim down. They're very good swimmers and can lay eggs, but they'll lay their eggs. These have complete metamorphosis. All right, so these hatch into a larva. That larva is going to eat, grow, too big for its skin suit. Skin suit's going to split, and then next bigger size of larva, eat, grow, molt, and then at some point it says, okay, I'm going to become a pupa. So they become a pupa down on the river bottom, and they pupate for a time, and then they become what's called a ferrate adult. So they've pupated, and now you've got the adult, but it's in a kind of like a shrink-wrapped skin, okay? Now these guys are actually really excellent swimmers, and so those pupa will swim all the way up to the water surface, and then they'll emerge again into the adult. And these adults can live for about a month. So just because you see caddis out, adults, doesn't mean that they're actively hatching. All right, so let's talk about the larva. These guys are very stout and grub-like, all right? So they look more like a worm. They don't have any appendages on the back, and they don't have any antennae really to speak of that are long enough to be a defining characteristic. And they're pretty neat. They can live different types of lifestyles. So the one at the top is called a cased caddis. So there's a lot of caddis that use like silk, and they'll spin little pieces of things on the river bottom together and make a little case that they live out of. And so they'll drag those little homes around, and they're very well concealed, and they'll feed. And so this one at the top, that's one of those, case maker. When I went to my first entomology, so we have entomology conventions where we all get together, right? The first one that I went to, there was a lady there, and she had these tanks of different like jewels and gold, and she had caddis. There's jewelry that you can actually buy. These caddis spin it all together and make little cases out of it, and then she'll pull them out and then make jewelry out of it, earrings and necklaces. It's really neat. So pretty cool stuff, but you'll see them. I saw one on the Davidson. I've got to update this talk to put in some pictures that are better for around here, but one on the Davidson that had made stuff like out of like grasses and stuff, and it was huge. So big old mop fly would be good for that one. There's caddis that make nets to catch things in. There's caddis that are predaceous, like this one, so he's free swimming, all right, like a green rockworm. So those are pretty cool.
That last one, how big is he?
I don't know. That was just a picture. No, he's probably smaller. Yeah. There's some pretty big caddis, though, across the country. All right, the pupa. So again, I mentioned that this guy, he looks like an adult that's been shrink wrapped. And so once they're in this pupal stage, they start moving around within that pupal skin. It's kind of like cellophane, and that creates a lot of gases, and it gives it a real iridescent look to it. And so they'll still swim up to the top. You can see he's got his antenna here, these really long legs and wings here as well. But again, just real grub-like, nothing coming off the back. And here's our adult. So they do have really long antennae, but we don't often tie those when we're tying caddis. The main thing to focus on is that they have these roof-like wings that go all the way past the abdomen. And again, I saw these when I was on the Deschutes this last time at night, chaotic, like at dusk. You would look up and there were caddis everywhere, huge clouds, but they're very chaotic flying. Here's some of them. These are pretty big. But you can see those are caddis and they're just kind of like all over the place. Whereas when you see mayflies, it's a very graceful dance that they do. All right, matching the hatch. Once again, all right, if it's a bead, that's going to tell me that that's a larva and it belongs under the water. No antenna on the front, very grub-like and stout, and no antenna or no appendages on the tip of the abdomen. Yeah, here's one that mimics that one, a smaller version of that one on the Davidson. All right, pupa. Again, if we have a bead, this is the deep sparkle pupa, so it's got a bead, so it's going to be deeper, right, in the water column. And again, stout bodied. This one is the emergent sparkle pupa. So no bead, we've got wings that are coming out, and this little bit of antron that it was tied with looks like the nymphal or the pupal shuck coming off. And I really do need to change out that fly. I don't know if anybody uses a caddis fly that looks like that. Does anybody use? No. Yeah, you do? Okay. Mine are usually elk-haired caddis, so that's good to know. But again, for that one's got the long antenna. We've got all the hackle wraps, so we know that's a dry fly. And then we've got those wings that are going all the way back past the tip of the abdomen. Okay. All right. Here's our last one for tonight. Thanks for hanging in there. Midges. All right. I put this, I'm sure you all are familiar with this hatch chart. So if you look, we've got the insects, and then we have the emergence periods throughout the year. And if you look in every single one of these, midges, 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 and of course in the winter, super important. So all year long, midges are out. Very important insect to have in your fly box, all right, to have these flies, because they can live everywhere. They're out year long. They can live in the Arctic, subarctic, thermal hot springs. You can find them everywhere. They have a special protein that helps bind oxygen, so you can find them in stagnate, ponds in your local reservoir behind the house. They're just everywhere. So again, complete life cycle for these. Here's the female. She's going to lay an egg packet that's got like 1,000 eggs in it. And they go down here. Those eggs then hatch into the larva, and that larva will again grow, molt, grow, molt, grow, molt. Again, they have that hemoglobin, which takes on that red color. So a lot of times you'll hear these called bloodworms. They will pupate down at the down here on the river bottom. And here's what the pupil looks like. Again, he's a good swimmer as well. So when it's time for him to become an adult, the pupil will swim up to the top. He'll come out of that skin and turn into an adult. So molt into the adult. That's the emergent pupa. So these for the identification, they're very thread-like, all right, and heavily segmented. That's the biggest key takeaway for midges. All right, you can see here's a segment, segment, segment. So you can really tell those. No long antenna, no abdominal appendages. And again, they can take on that red color because of hemoglobin, which is pretty cool, carrying oxygen. Here's the midge pupa. Again, long, very thread-like, and heavily segmented. All right. These also, here you can see like the wing case. So you've got your legs and wings there, and then some gills, fuzzy looking feathery gills up top. All right, midge adult, very small. So I was telling Susan, she's like, I keep seeing things that look like fuzz. And I was like, those are midges. Like anytime I'm fishing and I'm like, especially during the winter, and I'm like, what? It's all this fuzz coming off. I'm like, okay, those are midges coming off and emerging. So tiny, very small. And the big thing with them, they've got these really spindly legs and feathery antennae. So they look like very tiny mosquitoes, right? So let's talk about matching the hatch. So here we have a midge larva. Again, very thin thread-like body. A lot of wire, those wire wraps are what mimic those segments, heavy segmentation. They can have a bead or they may not have a bead, just depends on where you want to fish them in that water column. Okay. I still have yet to tie one of these pupa, but I really want to. I think they look really cool. Has anybody tied one of these? Yeah, I need to do that this winter. So again, very thin and thread-like body, heavily wired to give that segmentation. This is peacock herl, so that's to mimic the legs and wings that are in that wing case. And then we've got, what material is that? Is that antron or for the gills? Okay. Gills here up top. And again, those can have beads or not. And then, all right, I love this. I love this one. So this is a cluster of gnats, right? We can't fish one gnat, right? I can't see that at all. I can barely see the flies as it is right now. So I'm looking forward to my cataract surgery. That I don't know when that's going to come up, but you know, at some point I'm like, then I'll really be able to see those flies because it's just getting harder and harder. So what happens a lot of times, these midges are so small, when they emerge, they'll get caught in the foam and they'll all get shoved together into a cluster. And so this is a fly that mimics, you can see all these represent lots of little spindly legs that have been caught together. All right, so that's a Griffith's gnat. That's one of my favorites. And Susan, you were there for this day, right? Kathy, you were there? Were you there for this one up in Virginia?
Yes.
Yeah. So Celia, this was it was so cold. It's like 24 degrees. I could feel everything within my knee joints. Like that's how cold the water was. I was just like, this is nuts. And so there was all weekend long. I saw these big trout coming up, and I was like, what is it? And so I put on a Griffith's gnat, and Celia had on a zebra midge, and so we were all like doubling up. It was so much fun. Yeah, but that's some pretty big trout, so it was good times. But you can see that was a size 20 Griffith's gnat. Look at that. Fish looks a little sad about that. All right, last pop quiz. You guys ready? Yay! All right, number 1. What do we think that one is? It's got a stout body. It's got a bead on it. It's a caddis, yep. So that kind of looks like a little bit like a caddis pupa, honestly, like a deeper caddis pupa to me. How about number 2? Caddis, yep. And we know that because that looks like one of the case, yeah, because it's a caddis. Looks like one of those case caddises, right? And where would we find this one? What life stage? Bottom, very good. How about number 3? Very nice, yep. So dry fly, elk-haired caddis. What about number 4? A little tricky. A midge, very good. So that's a cluster midge, and right here we've got, this is a post. So that's for people like me to help me see it, right? How about this one? Midge, very good, midge. This is which life stage? Yeah, close, very close. Yeah, merger, pupa or merger coming off. And what about this one, number 6? Caddis. It is a caddis. So this is kind of one of those, it's a caddis, but it kind of looks like it's emerging because it has this material coming out. And number 7, midge, very good. Number 8. Yep, another midge. Yep, very good. All right, let's talk about sampling. Does this look familiar, girls? Lansing? Yeah, look, Celia. All right. All right, for sampling, when you get to the river, before you hop in, what should you do? First, look above the water, okay? What are the birds doing? Are they diving over the water? That means something's probably emerging and coming off, so pay attention to that. Go shake the bushes, look at the trees, look in the shrubs. Spiders, they make a new web pretty much every day, right? So everything that's so fresh on that day will be in the spider webs. And again, the grasses as well. All right, below water, I love, like this says bugs when you lift up a rock. I love that because that's what it feels like. They're all like, ah, and running around everywhere. I love to lift up the rocks. You can also get a paint strainer and put it around your net, and then you'll just go stand in the river and you've got the water going downstream, and so you'll put the net in front of you and just kind of kick up the rocks a little bit, and that will turn everything up into the water column. It'll float into your net. Take that net over, and you can take something like a lid to a pickle jar or something like that that's white that has a good background and kind of put those bugs in there, and you'll be able to see them a lot better, okay? The biggest one that I use, honestly, is paying attention to what the fish are doing as well, okay? So if they're coming up and sipping, obviously there's some dry flies. One thing that I see a lot of times, if they're coming flying up out of the water, coming real fast, you see them come out of the water and go back down, or porpoising, they're chasing emergers, right? So you want to put on something that's going to be a little bit lower in the water column, just below the surface for emergers. And then, of course, if we don't see any activity, then we're going to be nymphing, right? See, these are some of the books. I don't have the Orvis guide yet, but I love, we need one for a better one here for the East, but or one for the East, but this one is really good. Ann Miller is an aquatic biologist, and she would go and collect all these insects. She would put them in tanks in her house, and she would rear all of them out. And she studied their life cycles intensely. She's got great, it's a little pocket guide, so it's really small. This is a second edition that just came out because the first one sold out, and it had been a long time. So she just came out with this one, but it's great. It shows you each one of the stages of all these different insects, and she'll match it to flies. So it's a great book, and even if it's not exactly what we have here, it's still going to be close enough to know, like, okay, that's a mayfly or caddis or whatnot. So, all right, any questions? No? All right. Well, thank you all for having me again. Appreciate you. And thanks for the goodies.
I do have a question. Where's your next adventure?
I don't know. I had that adventure today. I'm going to take it easy for a little bit for now. So spend some time at home. Probably do some lake fishing, I think. You know, water temperature is getting warm. So, yeah, probably stay close to home. Yep. Lakes and smallmouth, I think. So we'll see. Yeah.
But I have watched Callie grow from a real basic fly fishing, trout fisherman,
Yes. Yeah.
and to see where she's progressed now is just phenomenal.
It doesn't, that's what I tell a lot of beginners too. So I'm like, it doesn't take much time. Just got to go do it. You know, I tell, especially the cool thing about some of these women's groups, especially in Virginia, they have never even fished before, right? It's not that they're going from conventional tackle to fly tackle. They've never even fished before, and they're jumping right into fly fishing, which I think is really, really cool, and it'll help them not have a lot of those bad bass fishing habits, right, for casting. But I tell them, I'm like, you know, that was 2018 when I started trout fishing. So it has not been that long at all. You just got to go, you know, so pretty. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.